So we've got some brilliant speakers this morning. We're going to have a look at digital construction, information management, all the lovely stuff that used to be called BIM. Maybe it still is, who knows? We're going to find out in the next half an hour. I'll introduce the speakers. If you've got any questions or anything, I see that some of you have found the chat already, so that's lovely. Do say hello to each other and communicate via that medium. Introduce the speakers, Q&A system down the bottom, do all the usual things, and we'll have a chat, and at the end we'll hopefully have a chance to have some Q&A. So speakers are DJ Gibbs, who's been here before. Thank you to DJ, who has just made it in the nick of time. DJ's a consultant with EY now. He used to work with me at our old firm, Hill International, which became HKA. He now provides strategic advice on digital construction to a range of public bodies and government organisations. He also has a PhD from Loughborough University on the subject of, well, I think it was resolving disputes using BIM at the time. He spoke at our first ever ConstructionCast when we were all worried about toilet roll and wanted to know what was going on in Hong Kong. So it's very nice to have DJ back after all these years. The next speaker is Sarah Keyte from HKA. So Sarah actually took over from HKA, I think, pretty much when DJ left the team there. So she also now has an MSc in construction law from King's College, a very distinguished career with all sorts of organisations such as HP Rebus, Multiplex, Mace, achieved a lot in a very short time. So we're really grateful for Sarah for sparing the time to join us today. She's also suffering a little bit from the tail end of a COVID dose, so it's kind of nice that she's kind of chosen to get COVID when DJ was on the very first thing when nobody'd had COVID. So we're kind of Sarah is also, I should add, a brilliant frontman for the HKA band at Expertise Rocks, and we're going to organise that again in April next year. So anyone on the call that's got a band and has any sort of vague level of expertise that could be loosely described as expertise, do drop us a line if you're interested in performing at an East End venue and doing some rock and roll. It's a great night out for charity, all sorts of good fun that goes on during that. So do to expertiserocks.com if you want a look at the last one that we did. And finally, last but definitely not least, is Ralph Montague. Ralph runs a company called Arcdox in Dublin. So it's a very international session today. We've got Ireland, we've got the UK, and we've got Hong Kong. Few of us in the world of construction technology could have missed the massive contribution that Ralph has made to digital construction and information management, both in Ireland and across the world. Amongst many things, he runs Arcdox, but he's also on the board of the National BIM Council, and he runs the ubiquitous BIM Coordinators Summit and community, and he's got around 4,500 people, and he's organising an event later on this year, a whole community setup that he's put together himself, which I'm sure he'll tell us a little bit about in due course. But so starting with Ralph, let's go straight into it. So what happened to BIM? Is it still a thing, or has our focus changed now? What's going on in the world of BIM?
It's still a thing. It's not going away. Digital is here to stay. It's not as if we're going to drop computers and go back to pieces of paper. It's kind of like COVID, isn't it? It's 2 years ago, everybody was talking about COVID. At dinner parties, whenever, that was the subject, and now nobody talks about it, but it's still there. It hasn't gone away, as Sarah will tell us. And so I think what's happened is we've got through the hype cycle, and I'm sure you've all heard of the Gartner hype cycle, that you sort of go up this to the peak of expectations, and then into the trough of delusionment, and up the slope of enlightenment, and into the plateau of productivity. So I think what's happened is we've been through that cycle with BIM. It's not the hype subject anymore. People are getting on with it. Not everybody's getting on with it. I suppose there's a little bit of a two-tier industry that's developing. Some people are just hanging on to old processes and waiting to see what happens. Whereas I suppose the more forward-thinking companies are just getting on with it and doing a great job in many cases. But there's still issues, I suppose, when you have this mix, when you pull project teams together and some are competent and some are less competent, and you have to deal with all those issues. But just 2 weeks ago, the Irish government reaffirmed their mandate. It's interesting the way they've actually incorporated not only BIM, but also the reporting of costs and carbon related to that. So they're using the International Cost Management Standard. So all projects beginning from January 2024 over the 4-year period. So starting with projects that are more than €1 million, and then within a 4-year period, there'll be all public works will use a combination of BIM and the ICMS standard. And that reflects, I suppose, what's happening in Europe. The European Commission has 2 massive objectives, 2 missions, you could call them. That's the digitization of the market and the Green Deal. So it's all about sustainability and climate change. And of course, everybody knows that construction is one of the biggest culprits when it comes to the impact on the environment. I think it's 40% of CO2 emissions come from the construction sector. An equal amount of energy is being used by the construction sector. 20% of raw materials are being used by the construction sector. So Europe is really pushing the digital agenda and the green agenda, those 2 things in tandem. And that's why I think this link between cost reporting, carbon reporting, and BIM will be a thing for everybody. And that will be the expectation of clients in the future. I think a lot of people are in for a shock. I think a lot of people have been waiting to see what happens. And Stuart, you're a cyclist, so you know that if you cycle every day, for the last 4 years, and somebody says, well, I'll just wait until somebody asks me to cycle, then I'll buy a bicycle, and they're not going to be able to compete with you. So it's like BIM is not something you just switch on. It's a competency, a skill that has to be developed in your organization, and I do think a lot of people think it's something you just switch on. You wait until a client says, could you do BIM? And then you'll say, oh, yes, of course we can do that. And then turn around to your team and say, right, team, we have to do BIM from today onwards. And that just doesn't work like that. And I think that's been the strategy of a lot of companies. I'll wait until a client asks me to do it, and then I'll do it. And but that's unfortunately going to get a lot of people into trouble. So, but it's here to stay. I suppose the focus has changed from the 3D models and all that sort of flashy stuff to information management on a more general scale. So information in 3 categories: so geometric information, spatial information, which was the BIM models as people call them, but also the underlying data, the non-graphical properties and attributes of every product that's used in construction, and how those are connected together into systems and entities, and the ability to have that data in a structured format that you can analyze and process for measuring costs, for planning schedule, for calculating environmental impact, etc., and also for the ongoing operations. So I think there's been a lot of focus on the data side of it. And then of course we are a regulated sector, so we still have to provide documentation for many reasons, for planning regulations, building control regulations. Particularly in the UK, you've seen a big move in the last couple of years around the safety and safety information post Grenfell, and then we also have environmental regulations, construction product regulations. All these things require documentation that has to be organized. So the 3 types of data captured in a common data environment, that's what BIM's become.
Yeah, it's really helpful. Thanks, Ralph. I think, and at that point, there was, as you say, there was a time I remember the editor of Building Magazine saying, I can't remember what the third thing was, but she was like, if I could get Brexit and BIM and whatever the third thing was into a headline, then I could clean up and retire to the Bahamas. But that's, you know, the days when it was the thing to talk about are kind of past, but it's certainly still there, isn't it? I think, and that ongoing FM / O&M type thing is really important. I think that from my perspective, I always thought that was the most beneficial side of it. And, you know, that you've got things like Neighbours. Don't know if people have come across that, but that's yeah, a standard that's come across from Australia recently to the UK, and people are getting into putting that into buildings, and clients are demanding it. So I know Stanhope as a developer in the UK demanding it, and they're going to want that information on buildings going forward. So I think, yeah, that's the sort of thing that's really important. I know, Sarah, you've unmuted. Did you want to drop?
Yes, just because I love this question. So kind of what's happened to BIM? Is it still a thing, or is the focus changed? Is such an interesting question, just because a lot of people in the industry don't know and are quite often too scared to ask. And I don't blame them. So over the last 12 years now, it's been quite a big journey that we've been on, especially I think here in the UK. So back when I was at university, the announcement of the UK BIM mandate was just starting to happen in 2011, supposedly coming into force in 2016. 2017, obviously, Grenfell, everyone in the construction industry working in the built environment is starting to look for their built asset records, and quite often coming up short, or just simply not knowing what lies beneath in their buildings. And then 2018, 2019, you see ISO 19650 standards. There's a rebrand to IM, so shifting from calling BIM building information modeling and actually then focusing instead on information management. So those are my kind of key milestones within our journey. The current state of the industry, from where I see it, is there's still a lot of adoption challenges. So there's a lot of positive stuff, exactly like what Ralph just said, but there's a lot of adoption challenges, especially still for SMEs. As BIM processes go on in projects, they quite often fall apart, I find, or what I'm seeing. So especially in construction, so that when design responsibilities, say, put with say either main contractors or more likely the subcontractors, the process falls apart because you're still in a race to the bottom, and the people who are racing to the bottom aren't using perhaps the technology or the information management systems that they could do. So in my mind, what's happened to BIM? We're refocusing on information management, which is great. There are a lot of industry players who are doing an absolutely fantastic job, but there's still a lot of people who need that support. So yeah, that's where I think we are with the industry. And just before we got on the call, I asked Ralph, what would the industry look like if say SMEs had tax deductions for getting invested with BIM or IM, and what would it look like if they had some more incentives from government?
Yeah, exactly. I think that's the thing. It seemed that capital outlay of, you know, do we have to invest in this thing is quite daunting, particularly as you say at the bottom end of the chain. So let's move on, because as always, I'm very conscious of time, and time just disappears on these calls. But DJ, we touched on, Ralph just touched on the kind of mandate in Ireland and the requirements there. What's the feeling for the worldwide perspective? How are things in terms of information in management and digital construction in other parts of the world? Is it, you know, there's the thing around, is it mandated in certain places? Should it just be voluntary? What's the, you know, and the process against deliverables and things like that? What's your view of how things are going around the world, particularly with your view being in Asia Pacific and stuff? Is it all different?
Yeah, sure. Same but different. So yeah, so as you mentioned, Stuart, so I'm based in Hong Kong, and I've been in Hong Kong for almost 4 years now, quite actively involved in BIM digital, and before that I spent a lot of time in the UK. So I'll probably draw the comparisons between there and flick in some others from other regions as well that I've come across. My view is that I guess the general sentiment is much the same. BIM, digital ways of working, are mandated. Certain aspects of it here in Hong Kong based on project value, based on being government project. So there's an expectation that it's adopted here. With that, they have a set of BIM uses that they expect people to undertake. So these are aspects like 3D design coordination, using 4D models for construction sequences, and there's a checklist of mandated uses that you're expected to adopt or to use on projects here in Hong Kong. Now, that's a bit different to what I was seeing in the UK. So here in Hong Kong, there's a big drive for, I guess, those specific outputs and specifically directing people to do certain things with their information, whether that's in the BIM environment. In the UK, it was a lot more holistic in terms of this wider approach to information management and how that information transfers through different states, how you can have greater confidence in the information that you're using, and I guess, ultimately being accessible for operations and maintenance to improve, I guess, the whole life cycle value of the asset. Now, while these two approaches they're very well, they both want the same thing. They both want change. So what's recognized in Hong Kong, what's recognized in the UK, and what's recognized in whoever I speak to that works in construction around the world is that we know that we can do better, and we recognize that we need to do something different, and BIM or digital ways of working are obviously often identified as a way to do that. But what I found most interesting between that approach that I've mentioned in the UK, which is very process driven, versus perhaps in Hong Kong, where organizations or projects are embracing technologies to meet those specific deliverables. And I say technologies because it normally starts with this view of a technology purchase, is quite different. So the UK's journey has been a lot slower paced, and I guess it's because they were starting with the foundations of digital ways of working, establishing those processes that people will follow. There's a lot of iterations, a lot of discussions, a lot of documents have been produced, which are brilliant, and the rest of the world are adopting or looking to adopt to address that. But that's come at a relatively slower pace. We've had to establish those documents, we've had to get them up and running. In Hong Kong, it's been a bit more, right, let's do it. Let's buy this piece of kit, let's give it a go, and let's see how it works. Let's see, not necessarily it fail, but let's fail fast and learn quick, and then adopt it again on another project and adopt it that way. And I think the two are quite complementary. It's great in Hong Kong because you constantly feel like you're moving forward in that way. It's sometimes you haven't got this robust process that it kind of sits in, but you are moving forward and you feel like you're making those steps, and you do move at a slightly different pace. But in the UK, you've got this, I guess, more assurance around how you're doing it. You've got the reference documents that you can relate back to. You can, I guess, justify why you're making those decisions because it links back to those kind of key documents that have been published. So quite similar but different approaches that I've seen. And just picking up on one of Sarah's points that she finished on as well about the investment as well. So what happens in Hong Kong is that they do have funds to support organizations of all different sizes to adopt different technologies and to provide training to staff. So there's grants and there's caps on these grants that organizations can apply, and they need to demonstrate that they've used the technology, demonstrate that they've realized some benefit from it, or share their learnings from adopting it. But it encourages businesses to kind of make that step change. It funds not only the purchase of the technology, but also placing people on training courses to learn about these different softwares or processes. And it's been pretty good, actually. In the organization, I worked for a contractor before, and it was used a lot in terms of getting people involved from all different aspects of the organization, not necessarily your BIM team and the BIM corner, but looking at all other I guess of those more traditional roles on construction projects and getting them into digital construction as well. So it's been quite good from that side. So yeah, just a little bit there. And obviously around the world, massive steps in terms of digital. If you look at the Middle East, some of the things that people want to deliver, the projects are unimaginable, let alone trying to get your head around how you engineer some of these. And they're really embracing digital tools and digital ways of working to deliver them. The conversation is a lot more. I know we spoke about, well, what happened to BIM? I think the conversation's moved on a little bit more in terms of, we spoke a lot more about information management. That's perhaps not selling headlines, so it's not spoken as much. But the language has changed a lot more to these digital twins, and we've seen outside of construction all the other buzzwords of metaverses and whatever. But it's this idea that we capture our data and then we use it in different ways. And I think wherever you are in the world, people are in that mindset now. They recognize the power of data in construction for their organization or as governments for their good, and they're trying to embrace that for different purposes, whether that, as Ralph mentioned, is for cost, whether that's for carbon, which was not on the agenda as much as it is now when I first started looking at digital productivity and so forth. So yeah, I think around the world, everybody wants to make the same change. The difference is the approaches in which people are adopting it are slightly different.
Cool, thank you. So Sarah, so following on from what all we've just said, there's obviously been quite high profile collapses of the modern method. The modern methods of construction might have been the third thing that Sarah's, the building magazine editor came up with. That was her key headline of BIM, Brexit and MMC might have been the other one, but MMC was always a big thing a few years ago, and there were lots of people investing in it. L&G had a factory where they were building homes. Urban Splash had something going on. There was a big contractor who famously built a factory. Ilke Homes recently seemed to, the wheels fell off. A lot of these have recently run into big trouble. Do we think that the problems, the issues that they've experienced could have been avoided if there was better information management on the projects, or is that completely unrelated and it's just a different issue entirely?
I wouldn't say it's unrelated. I think there is a much deeper issue with industry change that I think needs to happen for this for offsite construction to work. So as you mentioned, there's Ilke Homes, Legal and General, Urban Splash, Countryside, Caledonian Modular. I don't think Mid Group are posting great reports about their finances. And there's a lot of factors that have sort of contributed to this. So we all remember how venture capitalists quickly became very interested in modular. And I remember when I worked for a main contractor 5 years ago, it was this platitude that continually was brought up saying, oh, we're going to be leaner, greener, meaner, we're going to do so much better, and basically listing off Daft Punk lyrics, just saying we're going to be faster, better, harder, stronger, all with modular. But factory overheads are pretty big. Inflation the way it is, it's unsurprising that businesses run into trouble. The lack of the secure pipelines and investments is the biggest issue they have to overcome. Shortage of skilled workers, obviously a bit of a factor. But information management and designs need to be produced at a very early stage for modular to work. So you need to, as DJs, fail fast and really get that out of the way and actually be brave and actually standardize a lot of the design as well. So our industry just still isn't quite set up for this. We're not like a Formula One. We're not producing the same things as, say, the Formula One is, where they can build things off site and ship them anywhere. And it's we're always building a bespoke product, but we could have standardized some of those components. And I guess the we need to think about how to change as an industry, and yeah, as DJ said, fail fast and be brave. If you wait around for the perfect solution, and exactly what Ralph said about your cycling, if we wait 4 years and say, I'll go on a bike ride with you tomorrow, we're going to be very behind you. Whereas if you actually just be brave and embrace this, then you might actually get somewhere. And yeah, it's not, you're going to fall over, but you're going to feel much better about actually getting up and getting back on the bike. So I don't think that's the only reason modular hasn't gone quite as well as planned. But where it has gone well, so certain main contractors using modular factories doing great work with it, where it has gone well, they do happen to have like great IM processes and a really good attitude towards information management and design standardization. And they've been early adopters as well.
Yeah. So your message to Tom Bloxham at Urban Splash then is just to get back on the bike and start riding again.
I wouldn't say that. There's definitely something more fundamentally wrong with the industry. But I think we need to fix the lurking issues before we just try and set up a factory and think, oh, well, this will resolve everything.
Yeah, exactly. Cool.
But a big part, sorry, I was just thinking, a big part of a lot of the problems is that we're not all pulling in the same direction. And I used to think, oh, well, if only you had a EIRs, a BIM execution plan and protocols. And I think when I started doing more work in, say, the energy sector, where actually contracts are just written about 3D models, and they're called 3D models in contracts, I quite often get excellent models with absolute fantastic common data environments that allows me to figure out what happened, when it happened, how it happened, who made certain changes. They're excellent record keeping devices, but it's all because everyone's pulling in the same direction. And that's a result of the contracts, a result of the industry. If you screw up information management in a project which will blow up, literally, like combustible projects, then you're much more incentivized to actually get information management right. And I think that's the deeper issue behind the sort of collapses of these modular industries.
Cool. Thank you.
Could I add something to that? Or?
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, I think this idea of prototyping is actually what's missing in this industry. Is in manufacturing, they don't work out how a car is going to come together on the production line. But once something's on the production line, it gets executed exactly the way it was planned to be executed, because you don't have somebody installing an alternator thinking, maybe I'll move it because I'm not feeling like I want to bend that far over today. I'll just move slightly to the left, because they don't know what's going to happen. So the execution of the work on the production line is exactly what's intended to happen. But in construction, we don't think like that. We sort of think of it as an iterative process, and a lot of the working out of how the production is going to work is on site. And it's actually the most expensive and most disruptive and most dangerous place to make any decisions is on site. And yet we push so many decisions to site, and if we could use BIM as a prototyping method, let's build everything and coordinate it and resolve it in this digital model first, where it's cheap and it's quick and it's safe and we don't kill anyone and we don't spend any money on real materials, etc. Let's prototype it completely and then send the model to site for production, and then don't change anything on site. just execute the work as it was planned. If we had that sort of production mindset and prototyping mindset, we would save huge amounts of money, huge amounts of time, huge amount of lives, all sorts of benefits. And part of the problem is people think that buildings are bespoke, that they're one-off creations, but it's not entirely true, because buildings are made up of products that have been through years of research and development and testing. So the components that make up buildings are completely standardized.
Yeah, like what's the difference between, say, a classroom in a school in one school versus another school, other than its location? You can standardize a lot of the components.
Yeah, well, even if the components are arranged in a slightly different way, it's still the same component. It's not as if you can go buy a product that just came onto the market yesterday. Like, it has to have gone through years of testing and certification and all sorts of things. So if you think of buildings at the component level, they're very standardized, and that's where BIM is so interesting, because BIM operates at the object level. So every component is an object, and all the data about every component is there. It's been there for 5-6 years, because that product had to go through all those processes to be certified and tested, and get a declaration of performance and get a CE mark. And so all the data is there, and all you need to do is take these standardized components and assemble them in bespoke and fascinating ways. So it's not as if BIM restricts your creative ability to make bespoke creations, but if you think of it at the sort of component level, it's very standardized. And if you introduce this prototyping methodology where you say, well, let's almost have 2 contracts. Let's get a contract to create the digital version first. Let's pay people to create this digital version, sort it out, resolve it, and then get a second contract to execute the work on site. That would put BIM in the right order, because at the moment it's going the other way around. People are saying, let's sign up a contract to build a building, and by the way, at the end, if you wouldn't mind giving us a BIM, that would be nice. But
it's not a process at that point. It's the tail wagging the dog.
But a lot of people are still doing what I call retrospective BIM. In other words, they're doing BIM after the fact, which is completely missing the point and missing the objectives. It doesn't feed into this prototyping model. So you don't get any of the benefits of BIM if you do it that way around. And I bet you everybody listening on this call who knows is working on a BIM project knows exactly what I'm talking about. If you listen to people and they say, the BIM model's 3 weeks behind construction, how is that even possible? That's completely put the thing back to front. That's not a BIM process at all. It's not what was intended. And so I think we need to think about prototyping, and then modern methods of construction would work, because factories would have work to execute without changes.
Okay, brilliant. Thank you very much. Right, we are, as always, out of time. One very quick final question, and I want a 2 or 3 word answer from you all, if possible. Let's start with DJ, because I think he's the one who's said the least so far. So what are the biggest challenges or opportunities the industry needs to grasp to benefit from better information management, building information modeling, whatever you want it to be? In a few words, DJ, what's the biggest thing that the industry needs to do or get hold of?
I think from my perspective, probably skills, not just in people being able to operate the tech or the ability to follow a process, but the skilling, knowing what to ask for in terms of digital as well, and being specific with that, and making sure that you're clear in terms of what you want to achieve from your data or your deliverables, so that people will actually give you what you want. So kind of a big wide one on skills there, but that's where I'd start.
Sarah?
Collaboration. funding / incentives, though, as DJ said, it comes down to skills, but I think that the actual incentive to pull in the same direction as other industries do needs to be improved. Just bravery, willingness to fail.
Yeah, which by happy coincidence is the theme of the current president of the Chartered Institute of Building for the next couple of years. Sandy Rees-Jones is working on collaboration. That's her big thing. So yeah, Ralph.
I think the biggest thing is to have a very compelling why is this important to me personally, like what's in it for me. And this digital process has to save you money, it has to save you time, it's going to make your job easier and more fun. It's got to save the planet, like we've got to produce better quality buildings. We have to do that in a more sustainable way. We have to meet the demand, increasing demand for infrastructure around the world. So once you've got that compelling why, we're all intelligent people. We'll figure out the what and the how.
Yeah.
But I think what a lot of people are missing is why. Why should I do this? And once you get that for yourself, what we've seen in Ireland, because the mandate was late in Ireland, but Irish companies are doing really well because they weren't doing it because somebody told them to do it. They're doing it because they want to save money, they want to save time, and they want to do good business. So.
Brilliant. Right. One very final thing before we leave. There's a question from the wonderful Phil Schatz, who says, would you agree that key opportunities for BIM as an approach to information management is the ability to track how costs of the myriad components and specialized labor change from first estimate through to delivery, particularly in times of rapid inflation, challenging issues around cost escalation, et cetera, getting the cost wrong can be existential. Is that one of the big benefits? Is that the why, Ralph, do you think?
Absolutely. What's that Peter Drucker saying? You can't manage what you don't measure. So you need the data, you need access to the data to manage stuff. And that's the problem. Like at the moment, a lot of the data that we need is locked up in PDF documents. And it takes hours, days, weeks to process that, to try and get to an answer. So once we have data, we can use machines to process that data and get quick answers and save a lot of money, a lot of time, create better functioning buildings, a better functioning industry. So absolutely, it's all about.
Sarah, you were nodding in joyful agreement at the PDF's point now, is that?
No, it was just the disconnected data and the frustrating point, like so it's a great question from Phil about how that's one of our biggest risks and opportunities, and are we doing it? I'd say we're not quite doing it yet, and I don't think a lot of the software that we use that's typical in the industry still isn't that great at it. So there's a lot more innovation needed. The fact that a lot of models still don't link to risk registers, and there's a disconnect with a separate Excel spreadsheet as one of your most important contract documents. That's really frustrating. So I think yes and no. Basically, we need some innovation. We'll get there.
Cool, brilliant. Anything, DJ, from you before we leave?
Yeah, good question, Phil. It's really hard to do. So it's definitely a big benefit. And I think everyone wants it. It's not always the easiest thing to do, in my experiences, is tracking and mapping the cost to all the other elements throughout the project, whether that's design or time related information. So definitely a big benefit, but it's not many have mastered that in my experience.
Brilliant. Thank you. Yeah, so that's it for today. I've got to get to a meeting on the other side of town in the next 20 minutes, so I shall try and use all my skills to do that. So thank you all very much for tuning in. If you're watching it on YouTube, as so many people do, thank you for joining us on YouTube, but do join us live if you can. I've just realised about 5 minutes ago that I've been Annie Clift all the way through this session. I've been looking at the name on my screen and getting very frustrated that I didn't change that. I'm not actually Annie Clift, she's someone else. But yeah, thank you for joining us. We've got another one coming up in September, which is going to be looking at party walls, which is very exciting if you're into that sort of thing. So party walls in September, then something else, which I can't remember quite what I had in mind for October, but we're going to carry on. If you would like to sponsor the series, we've got a database of 3,000 or so people that you can reach across the world. We advertise obviously through all the speakers, or that gets out to the network, so it's a good opportunity to raise awareness of your business. So we're looking for sponsors at the moment. Do let us know if that's of interest to you. Thank you to everyone for joining us. Thank you for all the nice comments that we're getting in the chat, and see you all again soon. Thank you very much, everyone.
Thank you.
Cheers. Thank you.
Thanks. Bye.